okay. So let me introduce Jose Antonio Vargas. He is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. He's an Emmy-nominated filmmaker and Tony-nominated producer. You're almost going to have an EGOT there pretty soon. A leading voice for the human rights of immigrants, he founded the nonprofit media advocacy organization Define American, named one of the world's most innovative companies by Fast Company. And in 2020, Fortune named him one of its 40 under 40 most influential people in government and politics. His best-selling memoir, Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen, was published in 2018. And he's working on a new book that he's under the gun to get to his editor by October, which is called White is Not a Country. See? So Jose's going to start with a few remarks, and then he and I are going to dig into some of the things he said and see where the conversation takes us.
Hi. Can I take a picture of you? Because my grandmother learned how to use Instagram yesterday. So, of course, she called me this morning from California asking me where I am. So, okay, smile. Okay, great. I was telling Karen that this may be the only place in America today where you had two Asian American journalists, both born in 1981. But that was the same year that Beyonce and Justin Timberlake were born, FYI, just in case you were wondering. Really a privilege to be here. When I started this journey of starting Define American in 2011, I certainly was not after an EGOT. I was actually just after papers, right? I'm one of the 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country, about 200,000, I think, in Colorado. So before Karen and I talk, since narrative, I love that narrative is the theme for this entire symposium, and narrative is all we do and breathe at Define American. Please check out the website. And so I kind of want to get really specific about narrative and what we mean when we talk about narrative, specifically as it relates to immigrants in this country. So I am a journalist constitutionally. I like data. So there are 70 million immigrants in this country today. 70 million immigrants, right? About 550,000 of that in this great state of Colorado. 1 out of 10 people in Colorado is an immigrant, right? Of the 70 million immigrant population, 11 million are undocumented. So you can't separate the undocumented from the documented because usually they're in the same family. Like in my large ass Filipino family, I'm the only one who's undocumented out of 36 people, right? So in the next 50 years, according to the Pew Research Center, right, 88% of this country's population growth is gonna come from that 70 million immigrant population, which means the country is gonna get more Latino, more Asian, more Black, and more mixed race. Now that is just a fact, right? Now, there's an entire anti-immigrant media machine that calls that the great replacement. I like to think of it as the great replenishment of America. In the same way that the Germans who populated Colorado with the Spanish, in the same way that the Irish and the Italians and all these Eastern European Jews and all these Scandinavian people and all of these Norwegians, before they got to be all white, got to this country and made it what it is. What makes the Indians, Filipinos, Chinese, Mexicans, Salvadorans, Guatemalans, Caribbean people, African immigrants from Kenya and Nigeria, what makes them different from all those Italians and Germans and Irish people? I think that's the question. So Karen and I were preparing for this conversation, and I had this slide. I don't know if you can see this. Hold on a second. This first one. When Trump was the attempt for the assassination, how long ago was that? Was it just last week? Yeah, so much has happened. I put this on Instagram, and then I think I spoke to Karen right after, because it was really, as a journalist, I'm a newspaper person. I've been a journalist since I was 18 years old. It's constitutionally is how I'm built. It was really stunning to see in real time all the mis and disinformation, the lack of facts, all the assumptions, oh, this was fake, this was staged, all of these things that were happening. And Anand talked to this, right? Everybody got in their feelings and got in their rabbit holes, And people didn't want to wait for things called information, right? Facts, because facts do matter. Let me repeat that. Facts do matter. Data does matter. Your feelings are your feelings. I recognize that, right? But we have to be able to operate from the same place of understanding, operating from the same sort of facts. So the media literacy to me is a real challenge. And then what stunned me about it was, I don't know if you noticed, President Trump, former President Trump talked about this. What saved him was he turned his head on the time he was presenting an inaccurate chart on people like me. I don't know if you've heard this, but what saved him from the assassination attempt was that he turned his head just at the right time to keep spreading lies and information and myths to get people to be scared of people like me, right? How does that happen? So I don't know about you, I'm a YouTube person. And I didn't know until a few months ago that the Washington Post said, I used to work at the Washington Post, it is the most consequential social media tool. I live on YouTube. I watch everything on YouTube. From the news, from Bravo stuff, to sports, everything, right? And I didn't know that YouTube is the most anti-immigrant place on social media. If you put immigration on YouTube, most of the videos that are the most viewed are all anti-immigrant. So we at Define American, as a narrative change organization, we studied for 3 years how these videos are created. What messaging do they have? Who are the messengers, right? And so actually what we did, studying it, as you see this next slide, we mapped it out. So once you see an anti-immigrant video on YouTube, where does it go media-wise? It goes everywhere. It goes to the Washington Post, it goes to the New York Times, it goes to the New York Post, it goes to Fox News, it goes to ABC, it goes... The anti-immigrant narrative in this country elected a president in 2016 and may re-elect that president again in 2024, right? Somebody said no, let's hope for that. So, but understanding that this is a totally coordinated machine, while we in the progressive movements think about messaging and narrative as what our social media posts are, what are gonna be our hashtag campaigns, what press release are we gonna put out, what campaign are we gonna start, there's an entire multi-billion-dollar machine built that we're up against. So, and what does that mean? This is a tweet that came actually, I thought this really, accentuates this, right? On the anti-immigrant side, they think they're being replaced. I don't know about you, but in this country right now, there's more taquerias than there are burger joints. Did you know that? We sell more tacos than hamburger buns. And what would you all do without Asian food? What would you do? Just the variety of sauces alone, right? If you're not being replenished, and it's fascinating that you want to eat it, you want to consume it, but do you want it like here? Not just as work, not just as labor, not just as replenishment, but actually as people. So our job at Define American, the next slide here, is we have become the go-to place, so please scan that. Everything you ever needed to know about immigration, facts, numbers, context, what's a migrant, what's a refugee, what's a DACA recipient, what's a dreamer, what's a climate refugee, what's an undocuqueer, all of that is in there. So if you want to be the smart person at a dinner party or in a barbecue when the election gets heated this fall, this is your key. Our job has been, and I'm so loving that Anand talked about this, our job is to arm every storyteller with these tools. Because you know how it's so easy to just blame the media? I have news for everybody here. The media is actually you. It's you. So when one of your neighbors or one of your relatives or one of your coworkers or one of your classmates says something anti-immigrant, it is actually your job. And I can't wait to talk to Karen about this, because again, this whole feeling of the oppressor educating the oppressed, what does that, I think that dynamic is really important too. But on this issue, I can't think of a single population in America, 11 million people. We're on the menu every election season, but we don't get to vote. Again, the lie is so, the lie has been so successful that people think undocumented people with no proper documents can vote. I've been in this country 31 years. I think I paid so much taxes, I should be a Republican in this country. I have never voted. I can't. What am I going to vote with? You won't even let us drive in most states in this country. So it's actually up to you to really educate people on what this issue is. The media is actually you. And then the last thing I want to say.
Comment, Mark.
Oh, actually, we're not going to do that. So this is the last thing I want to talk about. Then I'm going to talk to Karen. So this question of how do you define American? I think that's a very community thing. I think every community gets to decide how they define American. And to be honest, when I first started doing this work, I just wanted to make sure that we had laws and policies that reflected the people who populate and who make America what it is. I didn't expect, like, awards, which is kind of really interesting. But they ended up naming an elementary school after me, which I didn't think was legal. How can you legally name a school after someone who's here illegally? Well, they did it. I wasn't gonna accept this because I thought at the time I was 38, and I was like, what if I mess up, right? Like these kids could be like, hey, you're embarrassing us. But then I realized that they did it. My justification is every single teacher, every single mentor, every single American in this country who's made me feel welcome in this country, Black, white, Latino, Asian, of all classes, they have allowed someone like me to stay here. And someone's decision of staying here actually depends on how you define who an American is in your community. So please keep that in mind in this election. Thank you.
Do you want to show the video? Thank you. Thank you, Jose. So I want to start with what was on one of the last slides, which was the slides that it's hard to hate close up. So let's start there. What do you mean by that?
I was trained pretty early on to avoid generalizations, so I will avoid to do that. And I think a big part of our empathy challenge in this country is that we have been so quick at those generalizations that we don't want to get into details, that we're allergic to this thing called nuance. And I think probably that's why I'm a storyteller, because storytelling may be the only place where nuance and complexity must exist, right? And so, I was fascinated listening to you and Anon talk about all those undocumented people who were canvassing, because in some ways I've been doing that since I came out as undocumented in 2011. You're probably wondering why I haven't gotten deported. I have no idea why. I actually, at one point, I called them. So I came out in June 2011. In 2011, President Obama deported 400,000 immigrants. By the way, I'm fascinated and will be curious how President Obama will talk about, because he has not grappled with this. He has not grappled with the fact that he ended up deporting 3 million people, right, in this country. Which is why when Trump got elected, all the progressives were like, oh my God, I'm like, wait a second, did you not know what Obama was doing all those years? So I came out in 2011 in June, and I know Obama. I used to be a political reporter at the Washington Post, so I was hoping to hear from somebody. And I came out in a very public way. It was in the New York Times Magazine. Of course, Bill O'Reilly invited me on his show when he used to have a show. I did all of that. And then nobody contacted me. So, that was June. By October, as a journalist, I'm like, what are they gonna do? And what do I say to all these people who are getting deported every day, and yet, because I'm in the news, I was not, because I was prepared. I told my grandmother, I prepared everybody for the worst. I paid the credit card bills, I did all that. So I called ICE. I was living in New York. I called ICE myself, and I said, hey, I'm writing a story for Time Magazine about why haven't you all deported me? And she was like, I know who you are. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, are you gonna deport me? Why not? Put me on hold. She got back on the line and she said, what are you doing? And I said, well, what are you doing? And then I said, I'm on deadline. This is a cover story for Time Magazine. We're gonna be in the cover. I don't know if you've seen that cover of 32 undocumented immigrants on the cover of Time Magazine. All the diversity, undocumented Black, undocumented white, undocumented Asian. And I said, I need a comment. And my government, because this is my government, right? I went to your schools, I pay your taxes, I contribute to Social Security, all of that. No comment. We do not comment on individual cases. And I actually think, what was it, 11 years later, 12 years later, I think no comment is how most people think about undocumented people in this country. 75% of our farmers are undocumented. Right? 75%. I mean, during COVID, what did we say? Essential workers. Not essential enough to get driver's licenses in Texas. Not essential enough to have health care. Essential enough to make sure that you have your salads, because God forbid you don't have a salad. The hypocrisy, the contradiction, and the visible invisibility of the undocumented class in this country, to me, is a defining civil rights issue today. And as somebody who actually knows, Kamala, myself, since she was in San Francisco, I am so excited because I think out of all the politicians I've met, for her, this issue is really personal. So for us who are undocumented, the choice could not be any more stark between someone who wants to deport us and someone who's a child of immigrants herself, right, who actually gets this issue. So if you can vote, please vote. If you have relatives who are like sitting this out, if you have anti-immigrant relatives who are immigrants themselves, you know who I'm talking about? You know exactly who I'm talking about, right? Please make sure that they participate.
I can't believe you called ICE.
But I actually, one of my favorite mentors through this process was John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis. They've only detained me once so far. And it was for 8 hours. I was in the border in Texas. And how many people here have been at the Texas border? Can you raise your hand? Okay, that was my first time. I didn't know that it was a military zone. Like you can't swing your purse and not hit an ICE agent or a Border Patrol agent. You're at Starbucks sitting down getting your latte and they're like around you. So I flew in, I was invited to fly in and do an event. This was in 2014, 10 years ago, this summer actually. Do you remember all those unaccompanied minors when they were crossing the border? And Hillary Clinton said, go back. President Obama didn't know how to talk about them, right? So I went. So I got there, I got to the Rio Grande in McAllen, and the moment I got there, my lawyer texted me saying, hey, I didn't know you were gonna go to the border, how are you gonna get out? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I have a flight to Delta tomorrow, I gotta go to LA. She's like, no, Jose, like at the border, there's a Border Patrol agent next to the TSA agent at the airport. So what are you gonna tell them when they ask you what your papers are? Because I've been flying with my Philippine passport with no visa, which is what undocumented people do, by the way. So then they arrested me on the spot, and then I was detained for 8 hours. And again, it was breaking news on CNN, all that, right? And then when I got out, John Lewis was one of the first phone calls. Because I guess he saw it on the news, and he was like, there were women, white women with strollers at the Starbucks talking about this journalist that they arrested. You've done your job. Good stunt. And I said, Congressman, it wasn't a stunt. Oh, you didn't plan that? No, sir, I did not. Well, you did your job anyway. I said, oh. And then while that was happening, I was getting dragged on Facebook and Instagram. Back then, Instagram wasn't that big. I was getting dragged on social media by immigrant activists who were like, well, look at his privilege ass. He gets arrested, it's on CNN, he gets released. If that was my dad, he would have gotten deported. So, and I said that to Congressman Lewis. And then he said something that I've been sitting through. I'm sure somebody's gonna write a book about this someday. He said that SNCC could not have survived social media. He said all the organizing that they were doing in the 50s could not have survived social media. Because now the activists were so good at hurting each other, right? I can only imagine how many activists have left activism just because social media hurt and pain has become kind of. So that was a real wake-up call to me. But Mr. Lewis kept saying to me, Jose, just keep getting yourself in good necessary trouble. So I keep that in mind a lot, especially if Trump gets reelected, right? To be honest, I don't know why he didn't go after me in the 4 years he was at the White House. And the thing that I grapple with, Karen, is should I be doing more stunts? If John Lewis was like, Jose, do more stunts. Why don't you go to the White House and tie yourself to the fence? So I don't know, but my grandmother would be like, you can't, you know. So, and also, would it matter as much? You know, what I did say to him over lunch was amazing. Back then, you know, they had 3 television stations. Everybody listened to the radio, and everybody watched the news. You had the same information for the most part. Now, mind you, back then, black media, black newspapers, right, who valiantly, courageously covered what was happening in the South, really was leading the New York Times and the Denver Post and all of those newspapers. We don't have a shared media infrastructure in this country. You know, Donald Trump can have a Republican National Convention and not talk to the New York Times for the whole week. He talked to all of his media machine, right? So and I don't think we even live in 2 media realities. I think given where the Latino community is, where the API community is, where Native Americans are, we have very different narratives. And I think the question becomes, how do we embrace the complexity and the nuance that requires? And then how do we actually recognize all the pain? You can't, what I found being in these spaces is, there's kind of this kumbaya thing, like let's rush to the intersectionality part without dealing with a lot of the subtext. You know, whiteness is ideology in this country. And you don't have to be white to be white. There are a lot of Latinos and Asian people walking around like white people. Right? And we can't even talk about that. The fastest growing, right now in this country, the 3 fastest growing undocumented population are Mexicans, Salvadorans, number 3, Indians, number 3. And I kept that in mind as I was sitting there watching Usha Vance, you know, the partner of J.D. Vance, while all those mass deportations now signed was all over the Republican convention. And then I kept thinking to myself, well, where Indian, are we just gonna assume that because Indian people are people of color that they're gonna be progressive? No. The facts don't bear that out. And then what is it gonna take if you're a person of color? And let's get specific. I have a lot of black friends who don't like being called people of color. They're like, I'm black, Jose. I don't know what y'all are doing over there, but I'm black. Right? Like, so there's all that complexity, and I think it's important that we don't just go to the kumbaya, we're all in this together part. I think we actually have to unearth some of that subtext.
So when we talked earlier, you talked about how do we do the kumbaya when people enter at different points in the story. So explain what we were talking about there, and then how do we get to the kumbaya when people enter at different points?
So this book that I'm grappling to finish, how many people here have heard of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965? Can you raise your hand? Not a lot of people. All right, well, if I were at like PragerU or Breitbart, if you go to any conservative media site right now, they know all about this. And they think it's the biggest mistake of the 20th century. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 is why this country right now looks the way that it looks. It is why you have 20 million Asian people in this country, who, by the way, I didn't know I was Asian until I got here. I'm Filipino, right? Think about that. Asian people are the world's majority people. This is the only place where Koreans, Japanese, Filipinos, Vietnamese, we don't even have the same cuisine, people, right? And here we're just Asian. And the same thing that you've done with Latino, Hispanic, Latinx, Latin people, right? In many ways, the original lie, and this book, my epigraph is James Baldwin, who would turn 100 years old, by the way, next month, in August 2nd. He said, great quote, "I'm only black if you think you're white." Let me repeat. I'm only black if you think you're white. So what does that sentence mean to a state like California, where 60% of the people are Latino and Asian? Where do we fit in that? We don't. And if I would argue that if whiteness is ideology, so is blackness. I think black people in this country have been fighting, have been calling bullshit to this country since the country was created. It's been saying, wait, do you really mean all people? Black people have been fighting from that from the very beginning. And if it wasn't for the Civil Rights Act of '64, all of us who immigrated, the 70 million people who immigrated to this country would not be here. So the debt that immigrants owe to the Black civil rights movement is profound. And yet, that's not something, even in our spaces, that we talk about. So this book is about that. And in the book, I talk about, again, I'm basically working with the Pew Research Center to map out where the 70 million immigrants are state by state, right? Literally have a map where I'm gonna show you, did you know that Filipinos are the largest immigrant group in North Dakota? I was totally surprised. You see the map, you're like, wait, Filipinos, Indians, Mexicans, Chinese, we're like everywhere. We're the third largest group in Mississippi. Like, are they all nurses? Like, what happened? Like, what's going on? So you really get to see that this country that has barely really dealt with the fact that it created this black or white binary. We're still talking about the Civil War. We still are living through the Civil Rights Movement. And on top of that, you added 70 million people. Now, my question is, all of these immigrant families, multi-generational, right? Colorism, our idea of race is shaped by colonialism and imperialism. Two subjects that this country doesn't ever want to talk about. American as an empire. I was doing an event in North Carolina a few years ago. I love going, actually, to Trump events. I do. I know karate, it's fine. And so I was doing this event.
It's theater. It's theater.
What's that?
It's theater.
Well, it is theater.
Yeah.
But, I've read all my August Wilson, Tennessee Williams plays. So I went to this event, and I started talking numbers. There are 5 million Filipinos in this country, 2 million in California. There are more Filipinos in California than there are people in New Hampshire and Delaware and Rhode Island. So I say this, and again, they're like, oh, a great replacement. In my head, I'm like, our food is amazing. Are you kidding me? So when I say this gentleman was like, why are there so many of you here? Well, and I said, well, sir, we are here because you were there. He was like, what? He was like, what are you talking about? Sir, the Spanish-American War? When you took the Philippines like you took Puerto Rico? Do you remember that? You called this your property for like 50 years. That's why you go on YouTube and you put like Michael Jackson, like the best Thriller video is like Filipinos in prisons dancing to Thriller. Right? Filipinos are so Americanized, and in many ways we still are in the Philippines, because we were a property of this country. As is in many ways, look at how Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans were treated. Right? He did not know this. He did not know that America took the Philippines, that America has been an empire, and still an empire. So now, here we are, litigating, making sure, it's astounding to me that we even need to explain why Black Lives Matter. Right? And yet we do. So in the middle of that, you added 70 million new people in the past 60 years that don't have the vocabulary for this. So just last week, I had to explain to one of my cousins who have been here since '98, who has a business here or employs people, she didn't know what chattel slavery was. And then I realized in this book, the book ends with a citizenship test. How many people here have seen a citizenship test? So there's nothing in the citizenship test that you take. Anand mentioned this, 1 million people naturalized to be Americans every year. There's nothing in that test about chattel slavery. There's nothing in that test about the Trail of Tears. There's nothing in that test about the fact that the Chinese people actually built the railroads and then got cropped out. And you see that famous photo of Irish people building the railroads with the Chinese cropped out. We have yet to fully tell the complete story of this country that is comprised of various narratives. And the question that I'm grappling with right now the most, because in this book, I've just done a lot of reporting. I was just in Birmingham. I'm going back. I told Karen. I've been talking to black voters in the South, particularly in Alabama, who are anti-immigrant, who have bought in who have bought the narrative that immigrants like me are a threat. By the way, it's not an accident that Trump said black jobs. No matter how you feel about that, the reporting, that's real for people, right? At least the ones that I've talked to. And it was really incredible listening to them, to people that I've interviewed. And then one man I interviewed, he looked me up, I guess, after our first interviews, and I talked to him the following day. Accountant, 39 years old, college educated with a master's, who's a Trumpster. And he looked me up and he goes, "Hey, I'm sorry you're still illegal." I guess he looked me up on Google or something. I said, "Oh, but FYI, like, so I am here illegally," which is true, I can get arrested at any point, "but I as a person am not illegal." And then I brought up Maya Angelou, great quote. "I am a human being, nothing human can be alien to me." Right? So we had that conversation. And then he said to me, "But you know, Jose, I just want you to remember, my family have been here for generations, Jose. We built this country. And we're still not treated as full citizens of the country that we built. You just got here." And then, as he sipped his coffee, wait in line. And, you know, I didn't know. I thought of John Lewis. I'm like, what would John Lewis say at this moment? I didn't know what to say to him. It was a real thing, right? It was a real thing he was saying. When I drove off, I was going to tell him, but I didn't. I should have told him that I am allowed to drive in the great state of California, because California, like Colorado, allows undocumented people to drive, right? Only 16 states, by the way, let us do that. My driver's license in California is not valid in the state of Alabama. So if I get arrested, as my lawyers remind me, if I get arrested in Alabama, I'm screwed. But hey, Lyft wasn't that available, right? And I'm sure Avis, I'm a Wizard member, I'm sure Avis appreciated my business. So as I drove off from the meeting, I said to myself, what I should have said to him was, "Sir, I'm not out here to take away something that's yours. I'm actually here to make the whole thing bigger. I want us to think about the abundance that is this country, right? It is an abundant country. And when people tell me it's overpopulated, have you been to Montana? I have. Idaho, some parts of Colorado. The reality is, you need immigrants to make sure that you have the workforce. And at the same time, we immigrants need you to think of us as more than labor. We are more than your labor. And that's what I'm grappling with this book. And I don't know how. I'm still in the process. Thank God I have a great editor who's going to help me figure that out.
So Jose, how do we connect then there is no the media, you are the media, to everything you just said? What is it that we are supposed to do individually and collectively as the media?
And this is where I don't think Anon is still here, but again, avoiding generalizations. I think every strategy matters. I used to go on Fox News quite a bit, actually, because it was an interesting intellectual and narrative exercise, right? Because whenever I go on Fox News, Tucker Carlson show, Megyn Kelly show, Bill O'Reilly show, someone would email me being really confused. I'm like, "What do you mean you pay taxes? What?" So then I'd go to Nebraska. I get invited to like the Chamber of Commerce meeting in Nebraska. Then I'd show up with my tax forms. And before you know it, this anti-immigrant crowd is telling me I should sue the government for taxation without representation. So in that room of like 120 people, half of the room I got through fax. They did not know that we contributed to the system. They just don't know that. And here's the number one thing that people don't know. The number one question I get asked every day, regardless of who I'm with, "Hey, why haven't you gotten legal?" Wait, what? I'm sorry, what do you mean? "Can't you just go fix this thing?" And I'm thinking to myself, wait, do people actually think the 11 million undocumented people in this country are just too lazy or too ignorant and don't want to follow some process that you all don't even know about? So then I would say, can't you just marry? And I'm like, oh, no, it doesn't work like that. If you think the tax code is complicated, look at the immigration code, right? Like immigration is is not one size fits all. It is going to be incumbent upon you in whatever situation you're in. When you hear mis and disinformation and incorrect things, if you don't correct them, who will?
But we have to know first.
You have to know first. And I have to tell you, and this is where some real talk. Among progressives, immigration has never been a top issue. Barely cracking the top 5. There's some studies that have shown look, I live in Republic of Berkeley, California, where there's like a weed, cannabis, all that. I'm all for legalization of marijuana. I don't use it, but amazing if you use it, great. In this country, legalizing marijuana is always a higher priority than legalizing people. In the state of Oregon, they took away driver's licenses for undocumented people the same year they legalized marijuana. Oregon, where all those farmers, so to me, it's been stunning how on their side, immigration is their #1 issue, and they elect Trump because of it. On our side, I don't know. We care, we cry in the family separation, we gave money. And I think a part of it is because we don't vote, because we can't vote. So, this is where, Karen, I so really appreciated your exchange with Anand about, it is not my job as an oppressed person to educate the oppressor. And I totally hear that. With this specific circumstance, I've convinced myself of 2 things. There is this freedom that I'm searching for that is connected to papers I don't have and the things that I can't do. Right? So like when I fly out of here today to go to Boston, it looks at my license, it's a marked license, so if a TSA agent would know that it's a marked license, they could actually arrest me. My freedom, as it's defined by the laws and the policies in the books right now, depends on how educated and informed you all are on what this is. Now, mind you, you wake up every day thinking about your own problems. Not about mine, about yours, right? Which is totally understandable. So how do I connect us to you? Mm-hmm. So that's the second kind of freedom. And I think I'm entering my John Lewis phase. I wish you were alive that I could say that to him. In some ways, I don't think I've been as courageous as I need to be. Some of that I think is because family, I know that my grandmother, I just put something on Instagram the other day. I said, catch me if you can. And my grandmother called me, what are you doing? They've left you alone. Don't put that there. And then I told her, Lola is grandmother in Tagalog. Lola, the worst thing that could happen is they would detain me again. I have so much writing to do that it may be the best place for me to be. Right? Like, I've been detained before, the food sucks, but there's a blanket, I'll be okay. But you know what the best part of America? They can't deport this. They can't do that. I was really lucky that my English teacher in 8th grade assigned us to read The Bluest Eye, Toni Morrison's book, that's being banned in the country. Toni Morrison, very early on, taught me that I cannot and should not surrender to the master narrative. That this illegal thing, this border thing, it's your problem. You created it, not mine. So my job is to be as fiercely free as I possibly can be. I'm gonna produce Broadway shows. I'm gonna create businesses. I have a shoe company now. This is interesting. It's called 1587, check it out. 1587 sneakers. 1587 is the date that the first Asian people stepped foot in America. Filipinos, 1587 in Morro Bay, California. So we were here before Plymouth Rock happened, right? So I'm gonna do all of these things. Of course, I have lawyers. right? And my job, and I love that Anand also said this, I am not here to make you feel comfortable. And I have been uncomfortable since I found out that the green card was fake and that I wasn't supposed to be here. So my job now is, and this is a message I'm sending to all the undocumented people, because we are in complete limbo. How do we actually act and behave as if we are free? How do we collect those mentors and allies who will make sure that windows will be open and cracked when doors are shut right in front of us? You gotta go get your people, right? Go get your people. And your freedom in this country depends on how you surround yourself with people who make you feel free.
I had a question, I just lost it. Well, I'll go to another question. When we talked, you talked about part of our job is to provide safety for each other. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, also, quoting Baldwin, all safety is an illusion. Right? I feel like I'm pushing myself at the edge. And I think in many ways, when I talk about the freedom that I've accumulated, surrounding myself with the people in my life who make me feel that, I think safety comes in that. Like just actually yesterday on my way here, I was talking to somebody whose DACA, everybody here knows what DACA is? Mm-hmm. DACA, yeah, okay. So his DACA expired, and his boss wanted to let him go. He'd been there for 4 years, DACA expired. So he called me up, what do I tell my boss? So let me go talk to your boss. Got the phone to the boss, and I said, sir, I don't have DACA, I'm 3 months too old, but as an independent contractor with my LLC, so by the way, that's the other thing, Karen. So this is how incoherent American laws are. So you can't hire me, but I can hire you.
Okay.
So as undocumented people, you're not supposed to knowingly hire us, although we know you do, right? But because I'm so high profile, I can't be a reporter for the New York Times. What I can be is an LLC that does business with the New York Times. So I started an LLC. I called it Undocumented LLC. Why lie now? So when I file my taxes, it goes to the Department of Treasury, Undocumented LLC. So I said to the boss, sir, your employee, he can actually now be this thing called an independent contractor. What if he starts an LLC and you do business with an LLC? Oh, I can do that? Yes, sir, you can. If I can do it with CNN, MTV, I did it with all of these media companies. If they can do that, so can you. But isn't that a legal gray area? Sir, America is a legal gray area. So those kinds of conversations, how willing are we to do that? That's you actually enacting narrative change within you as your own media platform. All of us are empowered to do that.
So when was you talked about this is a question I forgot and I remembered. You questioned whether you've been courageous enough. So can you think of a time when you could have been more courageous and didn't?
Yes, many, many times. Undocumented people were supposed to be under the radar, right? As a gay man, we're supposed to be in the closet, right? So I was a political reporter for the Washington Post in 2008, and then I was assigned to cover Sarah Palin while she was campaigning all over Ohio and Indiana. And there she was at this rally, and it was me and Athena Jones, who was at NBC, she was staying there now. We were the only two people of color in the entire auditorium, right? And then Governor Palin did this press briefing where she kept saying, illegal this, illegal that, these people. I was right next to her. I could have just said, Governor, I'm right here. I didn't. When I interviewed Barack Obama in Iowa, I should have said something. I didn't. So in many ways for me, the past 13 years of doing this work is making up for those 14 years between the ages of 16 to 30 when I was completely in the closet about this. Now, I'll be honest with you. I grapple with this term. Some people say I'm the most privileged undocumented immigrant in America. I grapple with that a little bit. But the reality is, I've been left alone, right? There are real repercussions when people find out you're undocumented. So, as someone who's come out of 2 closets in my life, it's on you if you're gonna come out of this closet. You make that decision. I'm not gonna force you out of it. However, I think we all know that to survive in this country, it's gonna require that we trust a circle of people. Like when I was an openly undocumented person covering Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2008. I would have gone crazy if I didn't have mentors who knew I was undocumented who I could call. I'd be like, oh my God, they're checking, the Secret Service is in the plane. What do I do if they, Jose, you worry too much. When I went to part of the Pulitzer, I remember calling my mentor saying, wait, my social security number is invalid. Is this even real? Jose, you worry too much. Congratulations, So you need to surround yourself with people like that.
So I don't know why I spent hours prepping for Anan and Jose. I just needed one question. And then I just try to...
Journalists.
Then just try to keep up with them. But thank you so much for spending some time with us. Can we give some thanks to Jose?